We're back. It's unprecedented. Not just Dina joining Michael Popok for another hot take, but what we're observing at the United States Supreme Court, hence the name of our new show, you can only find on Legal AF's new YouTube channel. Early voting has started. Hit the subscribe button. Help us get past our goal of 300,000 subscribers in our first, 5 weeks of existence. It's all because of you. And now we're going to dive in to this week at the United States Supreme Court with my colleague and close friend, Dina. Lots of developments. We're watching just a high level here for a moment before I turn it over to you. We're watching the Supreme Court sort of struggle to regain any type of shred of legitimacy as it picks up the pieces from what it did and destroyed during last term, and now has a bunch of environmental cases that are coming on the docket that they've scheduled for oral argument in November and December. They've already made some rulings in the environmental area. This on the heels of them effectively undermining the regulatory state, the ability of regulatory agencies to do their job, and the ability of federal courts to defer to experts in the area of the environment. We got that to break down. We also have not one, not two, but three former aides, top aides to President Trump in some capacity, who have all been either or all indicted, convicted, and or imprisoned, or at least one of them would like to avoid all of that. And they're in the news at the United States Supreme Court because all of them have come on bended knee to this alt-right Supreme Court asking for some sort of relief. I mean, Peter Navarro, Michael Cohen, and Mark Meadows. And we'll talk about that. And what would an episode of Unprecedented be if we didn't have yet another scandal at the United States Supreme Court as it circles the drain of history? Is my view, one of the worst Supreme Courts we've ever had. Got two news stories. One, it's a day of the week. It must be an Alito scandal. So now we've got a new one. We got to learn about, not because I want to, or Dina wants to, because we have to. We have to talk about a German quote unquote princess. In a country that got rid of royalty a number of years ago, we have a German princess that is against a woman's exercising her reproductive rights in any country. She is against abortion. She is Catholic, and she is also anti-immigration. And her BFF, Sam Alito. We know more about that from some new investigative reporting by the New York Times and otherwise. And then we've got Neil Gorsuch, who thought it was a good idea at the start of this term to author or publish a new book called, I'll pause here for a minute. What's the name of that book again? It's a play on words. It's Above the Law. No, it's Overruled. Okay, Christine, cut that part out where I struggled. Who has a new book which is called Overruled, which is not what you think. It's his view that there are just too many laws protecting, I assume, too many people. And he, as a judge, doesn't know what to do with all of them and has some very weird, tin-eared observations about what he thinks the role of a federal court is up to the United States Supreme Court. We break it all down for you on Unprecedented. Dina, I'm glad you're here again.
I know we're going to talk about Gorsuch later, but the irony is that one of the most activist judges in creating law doesn't like it when actual lawmakers are making law. But we'll talk about that at the end.
Before we jump in, you and I kind of pre-production, we're talking about our week coming up. Tell our audience, because it's motivating, about what you're doing on behalf of democracy in the week coming up.
I'm going to be an official poll observer, done my training, quite a bit of knowledge, and I'm going to Nevada, one of the battleground states, and I'm going to be both inside the polls and outside the polls, basically helping be an eye and the ear to be able to see, if any shenanigans are happening, making sure people are able to properly cast their vote, and then report it if not. I mean, democracy needs hands and feet. As many of us that can be hands and feet or honestly voices with phone calls or door knocks, talking to friends. And so I'm so grateful I have the ability to be able to travel to be a poll observer.
Yeah, it is very rewarding. The hands and feet thing reminds me, as I've said before, we are not only a participatory democracy, but democracy is a contact sport. And we don't just watch it. happen. We have to make it happen and preserve it. And you're doing your part. I've done what you've done in the past. I'm planning to vote on Monday in New Jersey early, but then fly to Florida, where I also consider it a home, to keep an eye on things in the Miami-Dade County, where Kamala Harris needs to run up her numbers in order to offset other parts of the state that are reliably red, in order to try to have a chance at winning Florida. But yeah, I think it's important that even on a show like Unprecedented, we talk about what our viewers can and should do to help preserve democracy. There are things. I ran into a old high school friend of mine. We've known each other since first grade recently, and he said he was motivated by Legal AF and Midas Touch that he found on his own. Not because, in fact, he was like, "Is that the same Michael Popok I went to grammar school with?" Yes. And Tim said, I took what you said to heart, and I signed up through the Democrats to do phone banking into Georgia. He lives in New Jersey, to help at the battleground states virtually knock on doors through telephone, if so to speak. And it's just, we got to leave it all on the field. We have to put our heads on the pillow at the time all the polls close on November the 5th, thinking that we did everything we possibly can do to protect our constitutional republic. Because we can't, as we'll see in this episode, we can't count on the United States Supreme Court to do it. I said recently, Dina, on another hot take I'd done with Lisa Graves of Court Accountability, that when the framers put together our country, they must have assumed, and I've done enough of the reading to know that this is true. They assumed that there may be a situation where 2 out of the 3 branches of government, which they saw as co-equal, could fall into the hands of one party. Even rabid populism, could take a feverish populism could take hold of the country, and something like MAGA could take over the House, the Senate, of course, as the legislative branch, and the presidency. But they always saw the United States Supreme Court as holding such an important role against populism, as a firewall to protect our democracy. And that's now in tatters. Why don't we talk about, Dina, and you lead on this first, the 3 different presidential aides who are all begging the Supreme Court for different things. Some none of which I think will be successful. And then I'll end it with Michael Cohen. I just did a great interview with Michael Cohen, who joined the Legal AF channel here, and people will be seeing it today over the weekend. 3 amazing insider views of Michael Cohen, somebody who knew and worked for Donald Trump for over 15 years. There's nobody on planet Earth that has more credibility about things related to Donald Trump and his attempts to take over America through fascism than Michael Cohen. And he's part of this Supreme Court list that we're going to talk about today. But let me turn it over to you now.
Yeah, just this week. This is why we have to have a weekly program. The Supreme Court does so much every week. Just this week, they made a decision about, Peter Navarro, or didn't make a decision, but Peter Navarro got on their docket, and they did make a decision about Michael Cohen, and Mark Meadows is still out there waiting for the decision. So those 3, the Supreme Court, all 3 of them asked the Supreme Court for help, essentially. Peter Navarro, the new one, he's being sued by the Department of Justice under the Presidential Records Act. He had communication on his email that he has refused to hand over in violation of the Presidential Records Act. He's refusing to hand it over, and he's asking the Supreme Court to intervene. That landed on their docket on Tuesday. Will the Supreme Court take up the case or not? He's looking for a lifeline in this situation. Same with Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows is trying to get out of the Georgia RICO indictment, saying that because he was a federal officer and not a state officer, his indictment should be removed to the federal courts and not the state courts. We are waiting to hear whether or not the Supreme Court, both him and Fani Willis, have each filed their briefs on that. And so we are just waiting to hear what the Supreme Court says. It would obviously be very damaging to the RICO case if it got removed to the federal courts, because if a Republican got into office, they could dismiss that case outright. Peter Navarro should have a slim chance at getting the Supreme Court to hear it, because he has not been successful in the lower courts. It's pretty established Presidential Records Act for them to be able to obtain these emails. But, he's hoping, like you said, that this very pro-Trump and Alito and Gorsuch and Alito and Thomas might throw him a lifeline. And as you say, Michael Cohen, the Supreme Court made a decision not to allow him to continue his civil rights lawsuit regarding the fact that he was, kept in prison longer as a retribution from Trump. So I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. But the Supreme Court very involved in these former Trump aides.
And I don't think they want to be really involved with these things. I think that this is something they've decided. All right, we stuck our big fat thumbs on all these pies last term, and we don't really want to keep doing it over and over again. Although when they want to revisit something, like gun rights, put as many of those on the docket as we can find. Taking away a woman's right to choose or limiting that, and reproductive rights, put that on the docket. But like some of the things, they're starting to feel better. They're starting to feel like, we better start rolling this back. Like these environmental cases we're going to talk about next and what they're doing related to them. They like to get out of the whole. I mean, Navarro is arguing, I had emails, and that's a Presidential Records Act issue. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Mark Meadows is still fighting to have his case dragged out of the Georgia. He's been indicted in a couple of places, but this one has to do with Georgia and the Fulton County prosecution of Mark Meadows. He wants to desperately get that to federal court to have a federal judge decide these things. Got rejected already. Jeff Clark, who had a very similar argument, just lost today at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals that he doesn't have a right to take his case out of Georgia state court into federal court. And I think the same fate is going to befall Mark Meadows, who's like, it started with the 11th Circuit for Mark Meadows, which made this extraordinary ruling at the time that, oh, wait a minute, you're a former federal officer? Oh, you don't get to use the federal officer removal statute. That's only for current, which I liked. But it's also the first time in 100 years that ever got declared that way. I'm not sure that was the right way to do it. That's the only thing I think the Supreme Court would be interested in, is to clarify that the rule applies to formers, but that Meadows still doesn't meet the test. I could see something like that. But then Michael Cohen, who, again, tune in on Legal AF, this channel here today, tomorrow and over the weekend. I've got 3 different interviews with Michael. Michael proudly declares himself, and he's right, as the only political prisoner in American history who is literally allowed to be jailed for exercising his First Amendment rights. He was sent back to prison, thrown in the clink for 16 additional days in solitary confinement, because based on orders by Donald Trump and executed by Bill Barr, because he wouldn't sign a gag order to not continue to criticize Donald Trump while he was let out on furlough because of COVID. He was let out on furlough during COVID, as many inmates were, because he has a major health condition that would have been exacerbated. He could have died with COVID. And so they let him out. But then, you only get to stay out if you sign here on the dotted line and you agree not to criticize Trump. And Michael told us in the interview, I already had the book about to be published, and no, I wasn't going to gag. And it wasn't about Michael's position, is even though the Supreme Court, in a very small one line, denied the appeal, it did not take any of it up. He had a good comment. He said, Alina Habba's jumping up and down for Donald Trump, saying, oh, Michael Cohen, once again, denied his frivolous suit. She should know about suits that are frivolous. That's all she seems to file. But his point was greater than that. He said, it's not about me. It's about the suit to bring to the public and have the Supreme Court rule that people can't be jailed for being the enemy of the president of the United States, not in our country. The principles went well beyond just a person named Michael Cohen. So it's not Michael Cohen that lost today by the Supreme Court. It's the American people. When you have a guy in the form of ex-President Trump who says he's going to jail his political enemies that are United States citizens and use the military to do it. Michael Cohen becomes the poster child for that, because it did happen to him. And so for people to think it's just, oh, him, Trump, it's idle chatter. It's not idle chatter. And Michael Cohen is living proof of it.
Absolutely. And the whole argument of accusing Democrats of weaponizing the justice system, because he did it. As you said, Michael Cohen's a perfect example of that. And every criminal defendant, no matter what their background, always has the government's power to contend with. That's why there's usually like a very imbalance of power. But when you have the corruption on top of that, it does become really dangerous. And yeah, so Michael Cohen absolutely is right in having stood up to that. And the Supreme Court, though, basically, like you said, they didn't say that his claim was wrong. They just decided not to allow him to continue the civil rights, essentially because they thought he was released, and that was the correct remedy. I believe that was their reasoning behind that.
Yeah, exactly. So we got that, and then we've got this. Let's break into the second segment, if you will, of Unprecedented today. Maybe the Supreme Court started to think better about the Pandora's box it opened last term by what appeared to be a full frontal assault on environmental policy, which is a dream. It's the wet dream of MAGA and the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo, big oil, big petroleum. Question is, do you think, based on the cases they're taking and some of the most recent decisions, which are sort of in favor of the Biden administration, do you think the Supreme Court, what do you think the Supreme Court's going to do this term on the environmental front? Now having invited and given license to all of these cases and lawsuits to try to dismantle the regulatory state around energy policy.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing, the Leonard Leo and the Project 2025 trying to diminish people from carrying out our laws in real time. And the cases that they added to the docket in relation to the EPA this week had to do with what we could say is very procedural, it seemed very much in the weeds, but it makes an impact. For instance, two of the cases right now, if you have a law like under the Clean Air Act, if somebody wants to sue the EPA and it has national significance, the outcome of the case has national significance, they have to file it in DC, which makes sense. That's where the EPA is headquartered. That way, the EPA doesn't have to go and fight a lawsuit in all 50 states, right? It's about conserving government resources. It's about making government efficient. It's about being able to litigate these cases in a streamlined way. Two of those cases in front of them are taking that to issue, essentially, wanting them to be able to sue the EPA in different jurisdictions. And then the third one having to do with whether or not smaller refineries right now, like if you are under a different size, you can't also sue like with your permits. So these EPA cases, very procedural, but this is about taking away the effectiveness of the EPA to be able to carry out our laws. And the interesting case that they did not put on their docket, that they will not look at, has to do with the Consumer Protection Commission. Our products, keeping our products safe. What this lawsuit wanted to do right now, the president can only, there's seven members on this commission. Oh, I'm sorry, they serve for 7 years. The commission members serve for 7 years, and only 3 of them can be from one political party at once. Really trying to create a neutral agency here. And they were, right now, a president, obviously presidents can nominate when there's vacancies, but they cannot fire somebody unless for cause, in order to try to make this, again, a less partisan, more neutral agency, which is what we want when we're looking at product safety, right? We don't want this to be a Democrat or a Republican issue. So they've created this framework to make it really neutral. Of course, the Leonard Leos of the world don't like it because they want to take away agency power.
Can I just cut in for a minute? They want a bedroom dresser to land on a toddler and kill them.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I don't mean to put too fine a point on this, but if you're against consumer protection, okay, I mean, that's not pro-business. That's anti-American as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. It's the one place where lawyers are good. People complain about lawyers, but that's why you're safer in this country, is because we can sue companies, right, if they don't follow our laws.
You know, it's funny you say it that way, because when I have the opportunity and the luxury to leave the country on let's say a holiday, and my wife will want to go on an excursion of some sort, and I take a look like some sort of let's let's rappel down this cave, or let's zip line through these. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm only going to do that in the United States. Not that I couldn't die in the United States, but at least there, the laws and the lawsuits and the litigators keep these people honest and keep these things as safe as possible. In the jungles of Costa Rica, no criticism of Costa Rica, but the lawsuits aren't the same there.
Oh my gosh, Popok, this is why we get along. I have the same thinking. I actually have ziplined in Costa Rica, but I thought about it like this is more dangerous than it is in America because people are scared to be sued here, and it does make things safer. So it's funny. No, I think the same thing 100%. And so thankfully, the Supreme Court did not take this case up. As we are kind of learning week to week here, our audience with us, what cases they take and what cases they don't take both have a huge impact. They didn't take this case, which means for now, the president can only remove one of the agency members for cause. We'll see how long that takes because they want to keep chipping away at this. But for now, that was a good ruling, or at least a good decision for them to not take up the case.
Yeah, I mean, what we're watching, I think, is, and we'll have to really watch it carefully and then do like a wrap episode at the end of the term when we can take the plane up 5,000 feet and go, oh, that's what they did. But what we're watching sometimes is them recalibrating, and it's a little chunky sometimes. It may not be appear on first blush to be consistent, but if they feel they want to roll something back, like, oh shit, we went too far, you'll see them throw a bone to the Democrats or progressives or people that aren't on the alt right occasionally and say, see, 9-0, we did something right. Like, yeah, except on the things that matter to our Constitution, women's rights, civil rights, immigration rights, you're 6-3 super MAGA. And that's what keeps me up on at night. It's not the 9-0s where they all got together like, this was an improper search and seizure. They shouldn't have grabbed the cocaine from underneath the chair. I don't care about, I mean, I care about that, but I don't care about that. I care about a woman's right to choose. I care about things that go to my moral fiber, right? And it's just maddening. But that's why you and I decided to do a show like this, so to have an outlet for all of our feelings. Um, why don't we switch gears and end the show, end the episode, as we said, with this, scandal du jour. What's on the menu? You want to do? Why don't you do Princess Duntaxis and her? That's my really bad. Sorry, German fans. This nutty heiress. We'll throw up a picture of her at some point. When she's not wearing a pink mohawk back in the '90s. She inherited what's the legal term I'm looking for? Shit ton of money from her ex-husband. And she's Catholic. That's fine. She is anti a woman's right to choose, and she is anti-immigration in the worst way, which always gives me a chill when I hear a German who's anti-immigration. You know what happens next. And so she's become an earworm for Sam Alito. What do you know about it so far?
Yeah, the interesting thing about this is, for it for all of us who are worried about the Supreme Court, legitimately, the tiny progress that was made by requiring them to disclose gifts like other judges, it's still not enforceable, but they have this disclosure rule, actually benefited in this particular case because Alito disclosed the $900 concert tickets he received from this princess, and that prompted people to investigate. So we're making a little bit of progress. That's the other thing with the Supreme Court is the journey is long. It is a marathon. A little bit of progress. We know about this princess, as you said, really right wing. One of the most disturbing quotes I heard from her was her saying that she didn't want people killing their own kind. Like she literally used that word. And when you talk about somebody from Germany who's anti-immigration using that word, it is really scary. And honestly, I think the root of a lot of our abortion, I mean, here in the United States, our population is going down. People aren't having as much children. And isn't that interesting? People are now panicking about abortion and being anti immigrant at the same time, because frankly, having immigrants can help our abortion. So, her talking about we're not killing our own kind is very telling. And I think an underpinning of a lot of the anti abortion, even if they don't like say that part here. So, Justice Alito being BFFs with her, not good on many levels. Popok?
Well, well, it's very Aryan, and it fits in with the replacement theory, which is a used to be a QAnon fringe theory, but has entered the popular lexicon of MAGA and Donald Trump, who talk about it's the goal of the Democrats to replace white voters with brown and black. And the unwashed masses that immigrate here, and that's our goal: is to just take people, you know, out of the Rio Grande and off boats and out of airplanes and take them right to the local polling station to vote for Democrats. It's the white replacement theory. People can look it up on their own. And it started out as a fringe QAnon Pizzagate type thing, but it has entered and it has entered on the wings of people like this crazy princess from Germany. And the fact that he like hung out with her at a concert with other people, other and all arranged. I mean, it's all, Leonard Leo is always in the background of all this, the Federalist Society guru, and the linkages between all of them. And why do I always have to hear about Alito, at a dinner with the Hobby Lobby founder, in which he talked about decisions against women that hadn't yet come out? And why does everybody who has a brain think that Alito leaked his own Dobbs decision against a woman's right to choose in order to make sure that the votes were galvanized in support of it? And why do I have to hear about Sam Alito on these junkets with what effectively is somebody who is completely against America and our American values, and that he's taking counsel from and advice from? It's that what you said is very accurate. Of course, that we learned about the $900 concert tickets. Who paid for the flight over? How much time did he spend there? And what happened when the boudoir door? I'm sorry, I'm suggesting something maybe that wasn't happening there. But when the bedroom door or the living room and the snifter and the sifters of brandy, the sifters of brandy by the fireplace came out. What was discussed there? And how did that hardwire into Sam Alito's worldview? She says, we bonded over our being Catholic. I'm like, okay, what else did you bond over? I mean, the most chilling comment that she gave to me, that I read about her in the New York Times interview, because after a million text messages, she finally agreed to an interview and sit down with one with the New York Times. She said they asked her at the very end, I'm sure it was a throwaway question and the reporter was not expecting this response, but listen to this one. He said, what other justice of the United States Supreme Court would you like to entertain in your a palace so big that she admitted she lost count of the number of rooms? This is not the common people. She said, oh, Clarence Thomas, he looks like such a nice man. Like, how come she's not asking Ketanji Brown Jackson out for tea or a stein of beer or whatever it is these days in Germany? Why not? And the point that we're making, I think, to our audience and anybody that's watching that's still on the fence, undecided, as they say, at this last moment. And you have the right to do that in society. I'm not gonna pillory you because you haven't made your decision yet. But to the extent that you're taking in data points to make your decision, why is it? Think to yourself, why is it that you don't hear about these types of scandals involving the Democrat appointed candidates, justices of the United States Supreme Court? How come we don't hear any skeletons in the closet related to Sotomayor or Kagan or Ketanji Brown Jackson? Why is it always Alito and Thomas and now Gorsuch and occasionally Roberts? Why is that? And why is it we never hear about Democrats? They have to actually make up things through AI as if they're Russian trolls, like the new one going around. This one was eye popping. Did you hear the new AI made up story that's been promoted by right wing MAGA, that Tim Walz molested a student when he was in school? Right. And they have the video, just like they had the video of Kamala Harris's hit and run that never happened. This is how they have to win an election, if they can win an election, with dirty tricks. I mean, you know what? If I were them, I'd rather not. If you can't win this election, fair and square through the proper application of voting registration rules and vote rules and at the ballot for the hearts and minds of the American voter, then you're just, as far as I'm concerned, you are disqualified from being a legitimate political party in this country.
Mhm. Yeah, and let's talk about the fact that this princess was from a foreign country. I mean, could you imagine if the Democrats were doing that? I mean, look at Mayor Eric Adams. If the Supreme Court had to keep campaigning, right, and getting these kind of gifts at the same time, then Alito might have been in the same type of hot water, let's say. But the Supreme Court has the benefit of this life appointment. Having the benefit of not campaigning shouldn't give you the leeway to be able to accept gifts from foreign, princesses. So I find offense not only is her extreme views so offensive, but the fact, honestly, that she's from a completely different country, that in itself should be a red flag. These 9 people have a ton of power, so much power. Maybe you don't get to do that. You don't have to become a Supreme Court justice. You go and be a law firm, partner, that's fine if you want to do these kind of things. I think you have to give up some things if you want that much power.
I agree with you. And by the way, just to show the hypocrisy about it all, every time a Democrat or somebody on the Supreme Court that's not a Republican would sometimes point to, in a comparative law situation, a law from another country that's more developed than ours, let's say, about civil rights or women's rights. You always hear the right saying, "Oh, now you're bringing in law from Sweden. Oh, we're not Sweden. We're America with American values. And what the hell are you rubbing elbows with a German fake
Right.
princess? She's fake because there are no princesses left in Germany. Why are you doing that?" And to your point about you got to give up something, I'm sorry, Mrs. Alito, to continue the theme of Sam Alito and scandals, has to give up the right to express her First Amendment views by having upside down flags and flags of insurrection flying over the Alito house. Well, because
Absolutely.
when I'm driving by the house on the way to
Yeah.
argue something at the United States Supreme Court, I shouldn't see a flag of insurrection flying over the United States. And for him to say, "Well, my wife likes
Mhm.
flags," that does not work for me, because you have to hold yourself up to a higher standard, right? You've
An
taken an
illegal,
oath.
absolutely, an illegal standard. That
Right.
house is community property. If somebody were to slip and fall, they would both be liable. You are
True.
liable for
Uh,
the flag of your wife. Like that, to me, I'm like, you're a lawyer and you don't see how what you both do affects both of
well,
you.
how about the letter he wrote in response to the flag controversy? He tried to he this is an actual, as best as I can remember it. This is an actual quote. 2 sentences. "My wife likes flags, period. I do not, period." Like, do I need to know this much about the Alito
I know.
dysfunctional marriage? Like,
We
I
do
really
not.
don't. I
Yeah.
was fine for 40, for almost 50 years, or 35 years as I left law school. I was fine with not being able to tell you the name of any Supreme Court justice's wife. I didn't know. I didn't even know they had wives or
Mhm.
husbands. I assumed they did, but but now I got to talk about Ginny Thomas and Mrs. Alito, whatever, I forget her first name, Martha, I think,
Yeah.
Martha Alito. Like, why? Why do I need to know their names?
Mhm.
I shouldn't. And the reason I do is because they're in the middle of ethical scandals along with their husbands.
Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, this was we're fired up
We're
on,
fired up.
on
We're going to
unprecedented.
go vote and make phone calls. We're so fired up.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll be back again for another episode before. We'll have one more episode of Unprecedented before the actual voting day. And you've
Mhm.
heard that my colleague here, my partner here, Dina's out doing God's work this week coming up. Going to do some reporting from out there. We might do it Unprecedented from out there, right?
We'll try. Hopefully the sound quality will be good.
Well, we've reached an end, or the end of another episode of Unprecedented, our weekly look at the United States Supreme Court with Dina Dahl and Michael Popok doing this on a weekly basis. We're doing it on Thursdays. It's up soon thereafter. And you're here already on the new Legal AF YouTube channel. Without you, we wouldn't be where we're at, which is close to 14 million views in just 36 days of existence. And going to be, we already went past my initial goal. So now we're on to a new goal, 300,000 subscribers by Halloween. Early voting has started. Hit the subscribe button and get others to do the same. So until our next episode of Unprecedented, Michael Popok, Dina Dahl, signing off. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.